record this section. Okay, welcome everyone. This is our Edu-BioMed seminar series. We are into our 6th seminar. Today, our speaker is Professor Claire Malleson, and she is going to present to us the work that she has done under the context of the Edu-BioMed. Of course, her work is much more extensive, but today she will shed light on the activities that were conducted within the context of the Edu-BioMed project. Professor Malleson is an archaeobotanist, and we look forward to hearing her talk and her team also. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So this is very much a team effort. So I'm joined by various people who've been involved in the conception and establishment of this project. So the first thing to introduce, because I know not everybody in the room knows what archaeobotany is, an alternative name for it is paleoethnobotany. This depends on whether you come from European or American traditions. And archaeobotany is the study of all parts of ancient plants recovered from archaeological sites, including macro remains, so seeds, grains, fruits, fruit stones, wood, and micro remains as well, things like pollen, phytoliths, and starch. Most archaeobotanists specialize in either macro remains or one type of micro remain, and macro remains are much more commonly used for understanding things like ancient economics, diet, things like supply chain management, agricultural processes, and environment as well. The reason we're able to do this is because plant remains are often well preserved in archaeological sites by primarily 3 different methods of preservation. In some instances, in arid locations, places that have been arid for a very, very long time since the plants were deposited, since people were living there, things may be preserved by desiccation. So this is preserved due to the absence of water. So, for example, sites in southern Egypt, sites in the Sahara, this can happen. Waterlogging is another method of preservation. This is how things like shipwrecks are preserved. This means the plants have been underwater from the moment they were deposited by the ancient people. So this is generally restricted to where people have perhaps been living in structures built across the tops of lakes or marshes, but it's normally to do with things dumped into ancient rivers, but also, of course, shipwrecks. The most common method of preservation is by charring, where plants are converted to carbon by fire. And as you can see from the image on the screen, obviously the desiccated remains just look like dried up old bits of fruit and fruit stones. But the preservation by charring also preserves the shape of the seeds. It's particularly if it's in a low oxygen environment. So based on the morphology of the plant remains, we can then identify often species, sometimes subspecies, but at the very least, we can usually identify a genus or a family. Occasionally, we might find things that we're really not completely sure about. We may need more specimens of something and more comparative material to be certain about what it is. So when we're working, we start generally, we group things by shape, and then we gradually work towards our specifics. And the way we then recover the plant remains from the archaeological site is by excavating specific layers and samples, and the plant remains are then recovered by a process of flotation, which will be explained later on. Once the plant remains have recovered, we identify them using relatively low power microscopes. we count everything, it's all put into a database, and then we run a lot of statistics. We analyze our results in various different ways, and we're able to look at the plant assemblage from various different angles in order to come up to different conclusions and different interpretations depending on what our research questions are. So I was working with the research assistant for the Edu-BioMed project, the original research assistant, Mustafa Atani, and he knew about the work of Archaeobotany through collaborating with me on another project. And he then approached me to ask if there was any archaeology at the archaeological site in Jebal Moussa, and could the Edu-BioMed project possibly help out? So I said yes. So to introduce the site for you, I'm going to hand you over to Nathan, who is a master's student in archaeology.
Thank you, Professor. I worked as an excavating participant in 2020 at Jebal Moussa. So the site is called Ornut. It is located in the northeastern part of the reserve. The southeastern portion of the reserve. Now, if we look at the picture to the right, this is an aerial picture of the site. It is a very rocky hilltop. This is good because, as you can see to the top left area of the hilltop, there are walls of natural stone that go up to about 4 to 5 meters in height. This gives a very safe and haven-like atmosphere when standing in the middle of the site. Most of this natural rock was used in the building, but also more buildings had to be constructed. To the left of the picture is the Golden River, also known as Nahr al-Dahab, and to the left outside of the picture is the Roman road, or the remains of the Roman road. Now, this site is very well positioned to the road, and so anyone living on the site had easy access to the coast and to the Bekaa Valley. A few features of the site are a lime kiln located at the foot of the hill, a multi-room building, and an underground tomb located under that said building. Next slide, please. Now, when we have an archaeological excavation, a few things have to be done first. First is a survey, which is an investigation of all archaeological remains found above ground, and then comes the soundings. The soundings are like taking a slice of a cake just to see the layers of the cake. We do the same thing with excavations, where we excavate a very small portion of the site just to see what layers, what of time were in the site. Now, a survey couldn't be conducted because in 2016, the whole area was actually reformed to fit a hiking track. So all pottery remains and all other archaeological remains above ground were cleaned off. So in 2017, small soundings began, and they were very productive, actually. They found out there were multiple layers, time periods, starting with the Ottoman, and then the Mamluk, and then Roman Byzantine periods, and finally the Middle Bronze Age. I say starting because when excavating, we go deep from the most modern to the earliest periods. You can see on the left, there is a picture of the tomb. Now, this is the tomb covered with the stones just to protect hikers from not falling in. And this was actually how the tomb was found. These stones have been taken off and put back in place a few times to investigate the tomb underneath. To the right is a modern map we have made, I believe in 2019, of the whole site. In yellow is the track, and around you can see a few of the buildings. The building on the left is what is also known as Area 2 right now, and is currently being excavated. And the focus of each season is actually on Area 2 over there. That is also where the tomb is located. Next slide, please. Now, we did excavate another area called Area 1. That is where the lime kiln is. Now, this is located off the map, actually at the foot of the hill. It's located there because so that workers wouldn't have to haul all that lime and lime plaster from the top of the hill every time they had to trade it with the surrounding regions. But at the top of the hill, we did find a few interesting things in Area 2. Looking at the pictures on the right is a very beautiful handle for an oil lamp, very well decorated. This does point to domestic life, normal people living in this area rather than military personnel. Also located were other civilian tools uh, such as stuff to pierce leather and other such fabric using tools. The picture on the left is actually the evidence of pithos storage. Now in this hole, this is where one would have dug a hole so that they could fit a pithos or a very large ceramic jar. Multiple of these pithos, evidence of pithos have been found at the site. And that is it for me, actually.
Okay, thank you very much. So then we wanted to, we had to start planning how to establish an archaeobotanical flotation unit at AUB campus. And for that, we turned to collaborate with Ranim from AUB Botanic, who's going to speak to us now.
Hello, everyone. Hope I'm being heard right. So I'm the coordinator of the AUB Botanic Garden. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll be introducing the process of how we chose a site for the unit within the AUB context. So in order to create and house AUB's first flotation unit for the study of archaeobotany, there had to be a collaborative effort with various centers and departments in every phase of the process. The AUB Nature Conservation Center and Dr. Malleson under the Edu-BioMed helped conceptualize the flotation activity on what it would look like and how it operates. And the Botanic helped facilitate site allocation with the help of physical plant and the facilities planning and design unit. And lastly, the landscape design and ecosystem management department helped with the implementation of the outdoor sample storage room. So next slide, please. So first of all, in order to start, we needed to ground a set of criteria to help us hone down several areas on campus for such an activity. And we needed an area that had access to water and electricity. We needed at least a 3 by 3 meter flat surface for the flotation unit, as well as additional space for a storage room for drying. It should be easily accessed from Fisk Hall, where Dr. Malleson's lab is located, so no difficult terrain in between them. It had to be hidden from the public eye, and this point was specified by us to us by the planning committee in accordance with their master plan. Since the sample extraction is a very muddy and messy process, it had to be shaded from winter storms, but also from intense sunlight, and it had to be open enough for the samples to be aerated and dried. Finally, it has to be in an area that can tolerate noise pollution from the water pump. So we can see here, this is the AUB campus map, and the black points are the sites we eventually were able to focus on following these criteria. So I'll go over them now in a bit of detail. Next slide, please. Okay, so our first focus was a plot just outside the AUB Museum, where there's plenty of facilities for water and electricity. It was an easy, road between the archaeology lab and this site, and there was plenty of space behind the museum, somewhat hidden, but the trees there did not really provide adequate protection from bad weather, and it was surrounded by offices, so the noise pollution from the pump would definitely, it would have gotten some complications. Not to mention the museum had other plans for the site, so the planning committee recommended that we look for locations elsewhere, and they recommended that we focus more on the lower campus. Next slide, please. Okay, so we did that, and we changed our location to lower campus. Site B on the left here was at the foot of the stairs leading to the tennis court. So it was well hidden with a lot less traffic, so it was noise tolerant. It did have a flat surface, but after some examination and measurement, there just wasn't enough space to work in. Everything would need to be tightly fit. And similar to Site C, it had some similar problems, although it had plenty of drains and could withstand messy work. But during that time, we knew that the building on the right there was being repurposed as a meeting room by the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Science. So, you know, it didn't really fit too well with having a water pump running there. So we had to change. The next slide, please. We had to compromise between site accessibility and traffic. And this was a very adequate location. It was basically a no man's land located in middle campus, so there was no planned developments there. It's not easy to get to from Fisk, but the rest of the criteria checks out. So it was protected from weather thanks to the dense overhead trees, but and also we could get power from the tennis court lighting, and it wasn't much trouble for physical plant to add a lockbox and piping. So you can see here there's a slab of concrete on the site. It's an old water tank that we repurposed as a stable ground for flotation work. So after our proposal was positively received by the planning committee, and we got the okay basically from everyone involved, Dr. Malleson and I then we contacted the landscape design and ecosystem management department and to propose the construction project as a summer course for the students. Thank you for listening to my segment. I'll pass this over.
Thank you, Raneem. So a little bit of background to the construction of the shelter. Due to the situations globally with the pandemic and in Lebanon with the economy, our budget was rather thrown out, shall we say. So money we had initially allocated to purchase some kind of greenhouse or shelter or shed for the storage of the equipment and the drawing of the samples, which is something very important for us. We essentially ran out of money. So this is why we turned to the landscape design and ecosystems management for a small summer construction project, which actually turned out to be an enormous success. And to speak to us about this is one of the students who was involved in that project, Karim.
Thank you, Dr. Malleson, for that wonderful introduction. So as Raneem already talked, and as you said, we are a group of landscape architects housed within the landscape design and ecosystem management under training. So we are third-year students, and we were given this opportunity to realize this project during last summer. So the project title is Building Something from Nothing, and I'm going to emphasize on that during all of my segment presentation. And this is because we actually, as Dr. Malleson already mentioned, the first thing as landscape architects we asked is about the budget of the project, and then we were not giving any budget for this one. So we had to think outside of the box and create this box eventually. So I'm going to start by the conception process, which is how we started thinking about the location where it's best fit in terms of ground. So already Raneem mentioned that it has been given access to within the tennis court site in middle campus, but there was also the issue of where would the storage unit be located in contrast to the flotation unit. As landscape architects, we had no idea of what a flotation unit is or a storage unit is. So part of that process was also to get introduced to these notions in order to understand what the final project is and what we're building. So this was part of what we had gone through. Next, please. So during the first week of conception, which was creating the idea, and we had a couple of meetings with Dr. Malleson herself, who came into our department, and she thought about what we had in mind. There were different plans. So we started brainstorming, sizing the storage unit. So we wanted the most efficient size in order to house the most out of the samples, where it would be located. So there was this idea of what would happen in winter, what would happen in summer, how would the structure sort of like get response to this different seasonality and climate. Accessibility issues were also thought in mind, because this space is used by the tennis court, so people will also pass there. So how would we manage to leave a little space for other visitors or communers to the tennis court to and fro? Next. So this is the base plan of the zoomed in site that Raneem showed of the AUB's tennis courts, which is the one on behind. And in red, we can see the structure in conception. So this is how we conceptualize the structure. And in yellow, we can see where the flotation unit, where the slab is, the concrete slab that was already mentioned. This is where the flotation unit was going to be positioned. And so we started out drawing these different forms of rectangular shapes because it was the most efficient in terms of space usage and in terms of the given allocated space. So this is like a 3D model, for example, that shows how the structure was going to be made, but there was still some void areas in terms of how we're going to seal it and finish it. But in the next one, in the next page, we also thought about this is when this project started to conceptualize where the position is. So we sort of found this position near the retaining wall as the most efficient place, having in mind that drainage is also an issue, knowing that these walls are porous and they would bring in water. So we had to move it away from the retaining wall just a little bit to let the water percolate within the soil. But there was this tree in the middle and it was hindering the space. So we thought maybe this tree could grow within the structure and then the structure would grow within the whole site. So then these concepts started to grow in mind and we started to phase them out. Next. So building something from nothing. The material here is the main thing that the main bulk of this whole story. So where are we going to get the material from? So we drew all of these rectangles. The ideas were great. Everyone was happy, but where the material going to come from was still not clear. So this is what we did. We did a material hunt. We started looking for these pieces that were left or not neglected, and started thinking, what if we can repurpose these materials? So the junkyard, which is located in AUB, was where we focused our main hunt on. So we started looking into these old door steel frames that were just left there, and they weren't even connected back in the structure, so they're just loose pieces. These are what we call the door jambs, and so we thought, what if these could represent the base of the structure? Because every structure needs a base. And so this base sort of looked like it's a good, solid base that could help us in the construction process. So we had to go there in different phases, and it took us 3 to 4 days going there ourselves and picking up the material. Then we had to take these material down to the construction units modeling room, where we had to connect the pieces together in order to visualize these frames that would eventually be put in place. Next. So these are the construction detail drawings that we had in mind. So if we connected these doors, these steel jambs, we would have corners, and then these corners, if they were connected properly, they would give us this rectangular prism that would eventually represent the storage units. But then there was some spaces in between that were still loose. You cannot have a storage unit that's not well closed or that's not well sufficient, because in the end it's a storage unit and needs to be the samples need to be well preserved within the unit. So the idea was to still think of something that we needed more material in order to enclose the base of the structure. So we needed the curtains for the storage unit. And this is when the idea of having something sustainable from nature came into mind. Sustainable, something that's biophilic in terms of natural elements. So one of the first things is the Phoenix dactyliferia, the date palm. The date palm leaves were used a long time ago by our ancient ancestors as the main construction, as one of the main construction materials. So we thought, why not bring that back in? And this is when Dr. Malleson also gave this idea of why don't we use this and as part of the construction. So this was one of the biophilic materials we use in order to construct the storage unit, in order to enclose the storage unit itself. So pruning was being done by that time, and material was being procured by us to the tennis court. So we would go, and so that they would prune the date palms. It was a pruning time back in late spring, early summer. And we would bring the leaves on site and start thinking, how would we position them in a net structure in order for them to be in most rigid form. Another biophilic design intrusion to the whole complex, the whole storage unit, was Arundodonax, which is a giant reed, and it's an invasive species, and it's very abundant within the Beirut region, even here on Ain Mrais region. And this is where we, as students, also volunteered to go to the nearby plots, and we took permission from the nearby areas, and to cut some of these arundos out, also taking into consideration where to cut them in order to ensure regrowth later seasons. And this is what we did. So these were used as the main facades of the storage unit to enclose the main facade. Next. So all of the materials were there, they were on site, but they still need to be connected. So also the way we connected these materials was also biophilic in a way that also represented, that also blended in within the natural elements that we used. So lashing or knotting is also one of the main techniques which was used in order to connect these pieces together, as well as naturally weaving the palm leaves that we already mentioned before. So which also brought the design, gave the whole design life in itself. So these are a couple of pictures during the whole construction process. So we also had to, we brought ours, so we started bringing shovels from here and there. Some of the students also had to bring their own material from home, just to accommodate for, just to finish the whole thing. We were just eager to finish the whole thing to see the final result. And we were mentored on, Dr. Beata Drexler, who was also our mentor during that course, as well as Professor Wissam Milham. They were also mentoring us during that time. Next. The final result, as you see, is building something from nothing, is this really blended in structure within nature, and the trees are overhanging within it. So it looks like it's part of the natural system of the site. And it's something that we are proud of constructing.
Thank you very much. So I would emphasize that although this looks like it's a really obvious structure, when you're coming up the stairs past this area, various friends and colleagues have said they didn't actually even notice there was a structure there until they saw me moving around, working in it. So it really is incredibly well hidden, and we've combined the recycling old materials, so we're not adding to the garbage, and also then of course using natural organic materials in more traditional ways, which means it can be easily restored, repaired, and generally kept working for a very long time. So we had the shelter, but we also then of course needed the flotation unit itself for processing the samples. This was really where Edu-BioMed really helped us. This is what the money was used to purchase the equipment. So a flotation system can be made from almost anything. When we were discussing this project, everyone was asking me, where do we buy a flotation unit? What do you need? Well, the thing was, in archaeology, we usually never have any money. So we have to build a flotation unit with whatever we can find. You can even do it manually, simply with buckets of water. The most important thing is a supply of water. You can either recycle water, as we chose to do, to conserve water, and you also need geological meshes for collecting the sample. So this is where Ramzi, the new research assistant for the project, was completely invaluable. He and I spent a long time going around Beirut, or he spent a long time going around Beirut, sourcing plumbing supplies in order to build the system. So we purchased the large tanks of water, or large tanks to contain the water. And then we bought the plumbing supplies, and then we had I had to build this, essentially taking things apart in order to get something new. So what here was essentially to put the tank and construct a top flotation tank, which is what would contain the sample, and we'll see exactly how this works in a moment. Put the pipes together inside it, insert all the different valves and taps in order to get this system working. So this took a while to build, but as you can see, we were successful in the end. So on the left-hand photograph, we have the large rectangular tank is the water reservoir. And the water is then pumped from this tank up into the top tank, and then the water flows off and the sample is collected. And on the right, you can see some of the archaeology students working with this. But now, to explain the flotation process, I'm going to hand you over to Ellie, who is a major from the biology department.
Thank you, Doctor. Flotation is a technique that became popular during the 1950s and 60s. And this is basically when...
you muted, Ellie, just check.
Hello, can you hear me?
He's there. Can you hear me?
We hear you very well. Please go ahead. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So flotation is a technique that was developed during the 1950s, and that became popular during the 50s and 60s. And this is basically the time when Archaeobotany became a field of archaeology, however, it was practiced before during the in 1905 by Egyptologist Ludwig Wittmaack, but it gained its popularity when Stuart Struve made a publication about it after he learned it from Hugh Cutler. Hugh Cutler is a botanist. This technique is based on the density of the artifacts, and it is used to separate the artifacts based on their density. So heavy fraction, it uses water to separate them. Heavy fraction stays at the bottom of the tank, and light fractions such as archaeobotanical remains, organic seeds, carbonized seeds, go on the top and are recovered. And we should note that this technique cannot be applied to samples from dry sites because desiccated seeds and desiccated archaeobotanical remains get destroyed when they get in contact to water. When the unit is set up, we add the mesh that collects all the heavy fraction, and we put the sieves outside the tank to recover the light fraction. And then the tank is half filled and the dry sample is measured. And this is important. It is important to measure the sample and record everything to know the density, to know the concentration of each seed in the sample per volume, يعني how much seeds we have per volume unit. So after the sample is added, we turn on the water, and the water gets mixed with the sample, and it pushes the light fraction on the surface, and the heavy fraction stays on the bottom. And we have to mix it gently and stir it by hand so that the water gets in contact with all the sample. And then afterwards, after the archaeobotanical remains are collected, they are dried and sent to an archaeobotanist to sort them and analyze them. And the heavy fraction is then manually sorted, and each category is sent to a specialist. Heavy fraction sorting is done manually, as I said, and it actually relies on our as much as 4 senses, obviously on how the things look and how they feel in our hands, how they even sound when you drop them on the tray, and even how they taste on the tongue. So a bone feels different on the tongue than a piece of pottery, but obviously this cannot be done now because of coronavirus conditions. Then afterwards, each category is labeled and sent to a specialist that can make the conclusions out of every category. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as Ellie said, the archaeobotanical part of the sample is sent to a specialist, and Maria, who is a master's student in archaeology, is going to explain that to us.
Thank you, Doctor. So after the samples have dried out from the flotation, the floods are now ready to be examined, and there are multiple steps to properly study the floods. We start off by measuring the volume of the flood to understand the ratio of seeds or charcoal to the soil. This will allow us to understand if the organic material is abundant in this feature or just moderate. Then, to make the job of examining the flood under the microscope easier, we sieve it to separate the fine material from the coarse. Now we can start to remove the seeds from the soil, and as we take them out, they are sorted into groups depending on their shape or diagnostic features. If the seed is easily identifiable, we can immediately classify it into a species or a family. After all the seeds are taken out, they are counted, and each group is counted separately to understand the ratio of seeds, if one group is more dominant, and to notice recurring patterns of types and amounts. One of the most crucial steps is to document everything, to carefully note down context numbers and find numbers with the number of seeds found. And also if charcoal is found, its volume is measured and noted down. Lastly, to complete a flood, the seeds are packaged into individual containers with their corresponding labels and put together with the rest of the floods in the same bag. So far, we have done 25 floods from the Middle Bronze Age and 2 from the medieval period. And as previously mentioned, if the seed is not identifiable, it's assigned a group based on its shape. There are multiple shapes identified, such as disc, round, bean, and so on. Some families were identified, such as seeds from the onion family from a medieval sample, and generally wild legumes and the rest. Some identifiable species found were grape, barley, wheat, purslane, and astragalus from the Bronze Age samples. Finally, fungal sclerotia was found in all samples, which might be the result of the forest environment. Finally, these results give us an insight into the plant resources that were available to the inhabitants of the site during these periods, whether they used them for food, fuel, or construction material.
Thank you very much. So as you can see, the project has basically been a real success, and we will be able to use this flotation unit not just for archaeological materials from the Gonad Adair site at Jebal Moussa, but we will use it for studying archaeobotanical samples from any other site that AUB is involved with in Lebanon. So the value of this project, this investment of Edu-BioMed into the flotation unit, is really fantastic. The unit itself will obviously need ongoing updates and repairs. As you can see, it's a handmade unit, something not quite from nothing, but it's not a professional unit. We will have to repair it, but we have enough materials to keep repairing it for a while. We bought spare parts when we purchased everything. This is going to add enormously to the knowledge about the Archaeobotany of Lebanon, because at present there is very little studied from Archaeobotany in this country, unlike our neighbouring regions. This is partly due to the recent history of Lebanon. As Ellie mentioned, Archaeobotany was being started to be done in the 60s really, and it grew in the 80s, which of course was when this kind of work was not really possible in Lebanon for obvious reasons. So the potential contribution to the knowledge of Archaeobotany of Lebanon adding to the picture of the region is going to be incredible. Also then education within AUB, as you can see here, the unit has already been used for teaching classes. It will be used in basically almost all of the classes I teach, which will be 3 different courses in which I include Archaeobotany. So there's a potential for up to 50 students every semester to be introduced to this. And some of those students who are not majoring in archaeology, not minoring on archaeology, don't necessarily maybe even have any major intentions to become archaeologists, have been offering to volunteer and get involved in the flotation and in the heavy fraction sorting. The sorting of the botanical samples, the flot, really has to be done by the people who are more interested in doing this, because it's a lot more complicated and it's a much longer process to do. So hopefully this is going to make a major contribution in many different ways. There's various people we need to say thanks to. First of all, the research assistants of the AUB Edu-BioMed project. Anis Abdallah from the site facilities has been phenomenally supportive in this project all along. Beata and Wissam from landscape design and ecosystem management, as Karim said, helped supervise the construction of the shelter. And then, of course, the large team of people involved in the Gornat Adair and Jebal Moussa Biosphere Reserve project. And then Dr. Herman Gens from AUB, who very kindly shared some photographs with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire, for this very interesting presentation, because it made us feel like we were with you from the beginning of the project, and now looking into the future of how this will be moving on. I open the floor to questions. If anyone has any questions or comments. Okay, I think everyone, it was quite an engaging presentation, and thank you for everyone for participating in this talk. And we look forward, as Pierre said, to learning more about the history of Jebal Moussa seen through Claire Malleson's research. Do you have any idea when this information will be published?
The preliminary report has been submitted along, so it's been collated with all the reports from the other archaeologists. But obviously we only publish a final overview once kind of excavations are finished after many, many years. So we publish interim reports. In fact, Maria is the person who's studying these samples at the moment. So she's working on that for me now. So she and I will be working together on producing a more detailed report, perhaps for submission at a later date to something like an archaeobotanical journal. For the moment, we need to study, you have to study quite a lot of samples before you can start to draw any conclusions or inferences. So we will, yeah, it will take a while.
Within a year or two, or what's the time?
Hopefully, yeah, we hope so. It kind of depends on how the excavations progress, because if you publish before excavations are finished, you might be missing a very important part of the picture. So we publish preliminary findings in in Baal on a regular basis. So but I don't know how long that will take to appear.
Okay. Okay, thank you everyone, and for taking the time to attend the seminar, and we'll see you next week in our Edu-BioMed seminar series. Thank you everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you everyone.